light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. I'm often asked about the collection of symbols that adorn my face and my costume, and what a very anomalous individual I am, that I guess in a sense I'm like, well, in more than one sense I suppose, I'm like no one else. When I took the Myers-Briggs test when I was in college trying to figure out more about myself, about my interests and my aptitudes for different sorts of career professions, the Myers-Briggs test results in a 4-letter designation that represents the person. It compares one to the careers and professions with one is most, the professions with which one has most in common. That I would have a lot in common with people in this profession or that profession, but not much in common with people in that profession. The whole idea is to help steer college students toward careers that they will both be happy in, and because they're happy in, that they'll be productive in. In any case, the 4-letter designation I was given was INFJ, which I read someplace is about 2% of the human population. So that's pretty rare, I guess. Then I discovered I was gay, and well, that puts me at about 10% of the world's population, so that's somewhat rare, I guess. And then on top of that, I much later found out, that I'm also autistic, and my first thought was, well, that explains a lot. But again, that puts me in a relatively small percentage of the population. I'm not sure what the statistics keep getting lower and lower because more and more cases of autism are being detected, but I think the last time I heard one, it was getting fairly close to 2% of the population is autistic. But the numbers is escalating rapidly. So that makes me unique in so many different ways, and consequently it's quite challenging being me, and yet I have to figure out ways to do it more or less on my own for as long as I can. I have no regrets about being who I am and living truthfully and honestly, but it is very, very difficult at times, and sometimes I get very overwhelmed, and sometimes the laws and policies and patterns of society are created for people who are not at all like me, and it's kind of like being given someone else's shoes. They don't fit very well, and they don't meet my needs, and I'm not trying to be a rebel, I'm not trying to be obnoxious or argumentative. It's just the simple fact that the shoes don't fit, metaphorically speaking. So, recognizing that that's the case for me, and understanding that even at 2%, there's going to be thousands upon thousands of people like me all around the world because of how large the human population has grown. And so I'm not the only one, but there is a sense in which I'm not a common example, I guess, or a particularly typical example. That brings me back to this word I ran into in college that I don't recall anyone ever really using the word before I got into collegiate discussions, or actually graduate school. Even in college, I don't remember them talking about it so much. And that is the word normative. That if you have a particular example, to be able to ask, is this normative? Is this typical of all other examples? If you see a beagle, is a beagle normative of all dogs? Well, no, of course not, because in addition to beagles, we have both Great Danes and Dachshunds. So a beagle is not exactly normative in the sense that it will tell you what all dogs are like. It will tell you some of the qualities that dogs have, but those qualities manifest differently in different breeds. A Dachshund has needs that a Great Dane doesn't, and vice versa. And both of them have needs that a beagle doesn't. And a beagle may have needs that neither of the other two do. And those are only 3 examples out of hundreds and hundreds of different breeds of dogs. If there is so much diversity in insects, and so much diversity in dogs, and so much diversity in cats, for those who are breeders of cats, there are actually quite a number of recognized breeds. It's not just a cat, it's a cat of a particular combination. It's a lot of mixed breed cats, but if you go to a pet show, you will see purebred cats of various distinctions. With most things, the closer you look, the more you see, the more you learn, the more you discover things you didn't even realize were there. The lesson in all of that to me is that all these things were put here for a reason. That especially if there is more struggle to be something unique, that there's probably a very good reason for doing it, for putting somebody through all that work. We have to draw something good out of it. And in most cases, there is something good to draw if we're willing to look. The question is whether we're willing to do the work and whether we're willing to take the time. In a similar sort of way, there are a lot of shifts going on in human society these days, conflicts that have been around for centuries that are suddenly bubbling to the surface again. Shifts in thinking and in doing, shifts in economic systems and political systems, shifts in social systems, and shifts in religious systems. I choose to embrace the divine as the embodiment of highest wisdom and greatest love. But beyond that, I really don't know how to argue for anything particular with any convincing evidence. Everybody seems to have a different idea of what God must be like in terms of gender or story or theology or mythology, or what does God want? What sort of rituals? What sort of representations? What sort of interaction, if any? Some have responded to the confusion and the argument over form by insisting that there is no God, meaning, but I think what they're really saying, though they may not always realize it, is that God is not what you say God is. I could agree with that. I remain, because there are times in my own life when things happened in defiance of probability and statistics, when things went amazingly right and there was no reason for them to do so, when probability says that something good should not have happened, but it did. That there was 1,000,000 to 1 chance against that, and still it happened. And it happened at the perfect time. And once you layer 2 or 3 of these on top of one another, it's beyond, as far as the human mind is concerned, it's categorically impossible, because the odds are so against it that it would be considered impossible. And yet, there it is. And in that sense, if we wanted to try to create any specific person ahead of time and predict everything about that person, first of all, I don't think humanity has the wisdom to pull it off. Even just to predict what the natural selection would be, it would still be a wild guess, because the possibilities are infinite in number. The challenge to me and to all of the anomalous individuals in whatever time is, how do we make the best of it, and whatever we find ourselves to be? How do we embrace that truthfully and honestly, rather than getting to the end of our lives and finding that we have been nothing more than the projection of others' expectations and never learned who we ourselves are, who and what we are, and what is authentically, genuinely, uniquely me. And so from the first time I ever read Thoreau's words about getting to the point of death and realizing you've never lived, I wanted to make sure that I knew myself. And yet the fascinating thing I found about that as time went on is that it shifts and changes over time. that there are certain core threads about the way I interact with life and with the world, that I have a commitment to truth and a moral standard that are exceptionally high. And it about sends me into a meltdown to think about compromising those. And people tell me those are good things, and yet within the world in which I live, there's not a lot of reward for them. There's a lot of reward for being able to turn a profit, but there's not a lot of reward for being always truthful and honest and hardworking. If you work hard at something that isn't valued within the current marketplace, you won't have a lot of money to show for it, and a lot of people may consider you a failure. As a person, as a human being, I would say you're a complete success if you manage to get through this life at all with your virtue and your soul and your wisdom intact, because there are so many things that tear at that and insist that compromises are essential, that you must be willing to lie in whatever situation in order just to get your needs met. And that's when, I guess, as Sister Hu, I stand up and say, then something's wrong with the world. It's not wrong with you. That being the case, those are things that need to be addressed, not ignored, not swept under the rug. The challenge of that is that speaking up about something you notice may unintentionally make you into what's called a whistleblower. The one who blows the whistle to say there's a problem over here, blows the whistle to say there's a problem over there. Somebody get that before it gets out of hand. And unfortunately, in many cases, there are people who are advancing things that are problematic for others because it's beneficial to themselves. Someone who is suffering from pathological greed, who wants more money, even though they already have more than they will ever need. But they want more because it's a kind of psychological sickness. Greed is a pathology. It's a sickness. It's not something cute. It's not just a common quirk of society that we need to accept. It's a pathology, and and the one thing that all pathologies have in common is that they will ultimately destroy you if you don't address them. We need to stop outsourcing all these qualities that we're supposed to carry within ourselves. The ability to defend ourselves, the ability to think, the ability to know right from wrong, the ability to speak up and have our own voice rather than always leaving it to somebody else to speak for us. And if no one else speaks for us, then we will simply we will not be spoken for at all. I probably cited this in numerous shows in the past, but I suppose it's one of those things that bears citing over and over again. The verse attributed to Martin Niemöller, that they came for the communists, and I wasn't a communist, and so I didn't speak up. And they came for the gypsies and the Jews and the trade unionists and any group, the Jehovah's Witnesses, any group you want to name. They came for them, and I wasn't one of them, so I said nothing. Finally, they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up. We speak up for each other because we want someone to speak up for us. We need to understand that the world is a shared space. I mean, I keep saying that over and over and over again, but we need to live like we believe it. And I've heard so many people say that everyone matters, that every life matters, that every life is potentially beautiful. Or maybe not potentially even, maybe it just is beautiful in and of itself for being a life. It may not be physically beautiful or superficially beautiful. It may not be organizationally beautiful. The fact that it is life makes it beautiful if what we value is life. Which ties into valuing our own lives because they're not infinite in length. At some point, life will be gone, and it will be for someone else to do whatever living is going to be done. In the meantime, it is imperative that we reach for being people of good virtue, that it is not only the length of it is not only the years in our lives, but the life in our years. That whether it is 5 years or 50 or 500, that there is a quality to our life that demonstrates over and over and over again how we took the life that was given to us and did every good thing we could during that time. And ultimately striving to leave the world a better place than we found it, to leave it wiser and more loving, to leave it kinder and gentler and more egalitarian perhaps. I suppose there are some people who aren't terribly concerned about life being egalitarian. You know, that there be a sense of equality, that everyone have at least an equal chance. We will probably never have equal ability, but if we really believe that everyone matters and that every life matters, then we are concerned that every person find happiness in whatever way they find it. The way I find happiness is obviously not going to be identical to the way you do, or any number of 100 other people, or 1 million other people. Each person finds happiness in a unique way. Nothing right or wrong with that, as long as we create a system that allows everyone to find their own definition of happiness, without having to conform to a definition that doesn't fit them, without having to wear shoes that don't fit their feet. In trying to deal with most challenges in life, I tend to come from a perspective of common sense. My friends keep insisting that common sense is no longer common. It doesn't change the fact that that's the way I think. And I'm not trying to be difficult, but a lot of it, when I scrutinize it and think about, could it be done better? Why am I doing it this way? When I actually take the time to think about what it is that I'm doing and notice the patterns in my own life, common sense, and the reason those sorts of things are classified as common sense is because they work in a lot of different situations in a lot of different people's lives. The other one that I tend to go to a lot, and I'm sure I've said this in numerous past shows as well, is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I tend to deal with a lot of challenges by doing prevention instead of necessarily doing the cure. Fire safety is always better than trying to recover from a burned down house, even if your smoke alarm went off on time. Learning how to be a safe driver so that you don't have to recover from an accident always costs less, is always less stressful on the mind and on one's emotions to deal with the fact that, no, actually I have never had a car accident. On a very minor note, I had some cavities in early childhood, but the experience of going to the dentist was so hellacious that I decided I was never going to have a cavity again, and I brushed my teeth so religiously that I never did have a cavity again. It simply never happened. As they say, an ounce of prevention. I was able to prevent that completely. Not debate, but the discussion I wound up having with my dentist many years later was whether or not I needed fluoride in my toothpaste and fluoride in my water, because certain natural health proponents were advocating for eliminating fluoride from water and from toothpaste, because it's a chemical that may not be needed by the body at all. And so I asked my dentist, what's your take on it? And he said, well, it may be helpful in these cases, but you don't have any of those symptoms, so for you, it's totally unnecessary. And I said, thank you, and I shifted to a toothpaste that doesn't have fluoride, because my dentist was my expert that I consulted, who had been to school to learn all about dentistry and the health of a tooth and everything else. He gave me truthful information, and I made a choice. And it has apparently been the right choice, because I've never had any problems. But the point was that I looked at the information and I made a choice, that I had the power to make a choice, that it wasn't arbitrarily decided for me and imposed on me. There are some people who have allergic reactions to certain vaccinations, and they need to alert their doctors that this is a vaccination you can't give me because I'm allergic to it. My body goes into into shock, and I could die if I was exposed to that substance. How do I put this? The challenge to each of us is to find that day, that time, that place in our lives where we essentially make our own declaration of independence and stop operating on others' assumptions and instead begin actually genuinely living our own lives. And the only thing I guess I'll say about the whole debate about pharmaceuticals is that I think my personal opinion is that natural remedies are better than pharmaceutical ones, but pharmaceutical ones are better than no remedy at all, because some conditions can be genuinely life-threatening. At one time, it was presumed that the doctor knew best in every situation. And looking back, we know that they didn't. They were making their best guesses, because at least 50% of the time, according to an Australian doctor whose article I read, at least 50% of the time, doctors don't even know what's wrong or what to do. They're simply making their best guess. They've been to school. They have lots of education. They are extremely knowledgeable people. But our universe extends infinitely beyond even them. And in embracing that larger universe, in opening ourselves to these larger possibilities, we come back to saying, maybe it's not as black and white as various polarized people or as polarized administrations would have us think. You know, that there's not just the two poles of north and south, black and white, right and wrong, yes and no, but there's all kinds of maybes in between that might be much better answers for each of us. But unless we know ourselves and know the answers and know the answer that we're going to attempt and see if it is the specific answer for our lives, unless we know those things, it becomes a choice that winds up being made for us because we simply don't have the information to make the choice. The thing about being an anomaly, though, is that there is a certain sense in which I will always be separate, but a certain sense, consequently, in which I will always be looking for my family. In the biggest sense of the word, humanity is all one big family, and so in that sense, we don't have to look for our family. We run into our family everywhere. The problem is most other people don't seem to know that, and so we don't always interact as family should, as in a loving and supportive way that most definitions of family would say the people involved definitely should behave and the support they should give one another. I guess the thing that needs to be remembered most about anomalies is that they do have something to contribute, because every major invention, every major step forward has been an anomaly that in many cases was profoundly unlikely except for the existence of a particular person who could make it happen. It is ultimately the anomalies that account for the positive shifts in our course, and that if we had not shifted away from war and towards peace at particular times, it would have been impossible for humanity to make as much progress as it has. And of course there are those who would argue whether any real progress has been made, because in one sense the toys have all changed. Now instead of sticks and stones we have technology and handheld computers and so forth. The forms have changed, but the essence is still the same. We're still trying to know ourselves and enjoy life before none of it is left. I am autistic, and I need to embrace and accept that. But I'm also very intelligent, and I need to embrace and accept that. Weaving the two together is a day-by-day process. I imagine the same is true for every other person on earth, whether or not you're autistic. That whether you opt from specific ideas or general ones, there is a daily life that needs to be lived, and choices that need to be made throughout that day. The choices that we make ideally will be rewarded, but not always, of course, because they are choices made among the limited resources immediately available, and they're choices that are made often in haste. The ideal would be to have sufficient time to thoroughly consider each and every choice we make, but it doesn't usually work out that way. In the final analysis, if my soul lives on forever and I remain at heart a spiritual being that is simply having a physical experience, there is a sense in which nothing on this side of eternity can be lost, because it's already on a finite schedule anyway. This physical body is only going to be here a limited amount of time. It can't really supersede that. It's not designed to. If my spiritual reality is the fundamental reality, then it goes on, presumably without missing a beat, but there'll be some sort of adjustment to do to integrate everything that was learned and accumulated during this life. The thing I want to leave you with as we wind up this show is just that it's okay to question, and it's okay to do things because it's the best available answer of the moment. Change is inevitable. It is always happening, and that change is not the enemy. Stagnation, if anything, is the enemy, because that keeps you from growing and breathing and living. I realize my thoughts have been somewhat rambling in this show, but I do hope that they have been helpful to you, and that you will find a way to live your own integrity rather than merely the projections of other people's dreams. Thank you for watching.